Welcome to Empire State Sports Report, where we talk all things Giants, Yankees, and Mets. I'm Adrianna, your host. Today, we are talking all things Giants because it is free agency season. There's a lot to discuss, and today I'm joined by a special guest, Dan Orlando, who is the publisher of the newsletter New in Blue. I'm going to have the link in the show notes here, so you guys make sure you subscribe because especially next week, there's going to be a lot to discuss. So, Dan, welcome. Another Giants fan, too. I'm excited to have you on.
Thank you. Very excited to be here.
So let's start with one of my favorite questions is, how did you become a Giants fan?
Sure. So actually my first two games were Jets games, and I want to say 95, and they just didn't click with me. I think Marino was my first one, but started going to Giants games around age 6. Really took to it. I think my favorite color was blue, and I think it's that simple. But was a diehard fan growing up, really wanted to get into it, wanted to be a sports writer. The game where Eli threw his first fourth quarter comeback against the Broncos in 05, the touchdown to Toomer, that was like, oh my God, I want to be a sports writer. I just came out of that game feeling that, and I pursued it, and I did do it for several years. I eventually left. I did write for SNY for a little while, sporting news, but I eventually left and went into a different field. But I've really wanted to come back because I feel like I have a lot to give, and I'm really excited to be here.
And this is how you and I got connected to Talking Giants and now New in Blue. So for those who haven't subscribed yet, tell us a little bit about the newsletter and what they can expect from it.
Sure. So this newsletter is focusing specifically on new players and potential players they can target. And then once we get into the season, we're going to focus on how each of those players is doing from week to week. And I think what's really great about this is that there's a lot of great Giants content out there, but always like my favorite part about all of it, like I'm the guy who wants to spend more time in GM mode on Madden than actually playing the games. It's just kind of working through the things that they can do to make the team better. And this is obviously the best time of year for that. So, we're brand new and we're just getting up and running, but this is like the best time. We're jumping in head first. Next week is a big week. So if you're really interested in the ways the Giants can get better, and good news for me, there are many, now is the time to subscribe to the newsletter.
Definitely. So again, that's linked in the show notes here for you guys to make sure you go ahead and click that. And it's a free newsletter. So let's talk about maybe like the top 3 to 5 targets on your wish list for free agency with it just around the corner.
Sure.
Who are your guys?
Yeah. So I'm thinking I want either DJ Reed or Charvarius Ward. I could definitely be talking to a different cornerback right now. I just think they need to get a CB1. I also want them investing. I want Dexter Lawrence happy. I mean, number one, we need DT depth, but I also we've had a bad history of having good players in their prime just not get what they need, especially at defensive tackle. Don't want that to happen with Dex. So, Milton Williams is definitely on my radar. And then right guard, which is kind of like a cop-out answer because they don't have one. So, I mean, Josh Ezeudu, but I mean, come on. So, they really need a right guard. And so there's a couple of reasons. Like I want those to be the areas they hit because it's a big need, but also, I think that's where the market's at its best right now. I don't think they need to go out and get a star. Like if T Higgins was available, I wouldn't want them outbidding the Patriots for T Higgins.
Right. That's how I kind of feel about Joey Bosa. Like the fact that he's on the market and he's available, 5-time Pro Bowler, flashy player, like sounds really exciting. Yeah. But I'm like, the Giants are in no position to go spend a lot of money on someone like him when they have about 15 other holes that they need, a limited amount of money and a certain amount of draft picks. And on top of that, they need a quarterback and they need more than one quarterback.
I couldn't agree more. I think Joey Bosa, and look, if Joe Shane does something like that, I would enjoy it, while it lasts. But really what sticks out to me is that I think he's averaged between 7 and 8 games a season over the past 3 years, something like that. So the Giants don't need that. If this is a guy that was durable, I go, yeah, let's move Kayvon back to Ojulari's role, which, to be honest, we might feel better about Kayvon if that happened. But, I don't see them going after like an injury-prone guy, especially at that position where they do have 2 decent starters. If they go after Jair Alexander and he has his injury history, like I kind of get it because Joe Shane does look desperate and he's been acting desperate. But I would like to see them, get the top corner in the market, get one of the better guards, and then get some depth along the defensive tackle side.
Yeah, I feel the same way. To me, Milton Williams is my number 4 on my list because I just feel like a quarterback needs to be the number 1 priority outside of the guard and the corner, but I love Milton Williams. I feel like he would really make a difference on this team. Like you said, Dexter Lawrence so desperately needs some help. But on the flip side of that, I do think the Giants are lucky in the sense that if they can't bring in someone like Williams, at least they're going to have their option to bring in a good defensive lineman in the draft. So I feel like that is a nice benefit because it's such a defensive lineman heavy draft.
For sure. And that's where, and I'd love to see them add on both sides. And yeah, I didn't say quarterback because I'm almost at this point, I'm looking at it as this like separate thing. I'm not even looking at it as free agency. It's just like, just fix it like that. It's just a whole nother scenario that it doesn't even process in my brain. It's like free agency. But, I think if they had gotten Stafford and, the first issue we had on this really focused on that, had they gotten Stafford, there was definitely detractors who were like, hey, maybe he's past his prime. That's why the Rams are willing to get rid of him. He's not great historically outside. He's 37. All valid points. I wasn't so worried about what he was actually going to do on the field. I like the idea that he was going to let the Giants take the best player available in the draft. And now we're sitting there going, I think we have to give up that second round pick to get which, there goes Tyleik Williams, as a defensive tackle out of Ohio State. So I'm part of why I maybe want them to get it done in free agency on the defensive tackle side. It's just that I don't know. This is a draft deep in defensive tackles, but what are we now going to give up for a quarterback we hope is good? That's kind of a whole nother can of worms.
Yeah. So with that being said, I heard today from Art Stapleton, he was on the Pat McAfee show, that the Giants are negotiating with Aaron Rodgers. So it sounds like, they've made it past that next step where they're going to try and see if they can get on the same page when it comes to a number and a contract and all of that. What are your thoughts on Aaron Rodgers to the Giants?
Well, I know that if he signs with the Giants, everyone I know is going to be blowing up my phone and annoying me for about 6 months. So that's something I have to take into account. But honestly, I don't think it's terrible. I do think he's a distraction. I did not love how he handled himself on the Jets. That being said, I'm looking at what can the Giants do to just be a decent team this year and build their roster for the long term. And if bringing him in allows them to be, more of a destination for potential free agents, allows them to play competitive football, at least for a couple of months while, let's say, Cam Ward gets ready, or maybe they do take a defensive star at 3 overall. I think that could have benefits. So I'm not going to slam the decision until we see what happens. I am going to roll my eyes when he doesn't show up for a week of training camp for some stupid reason. But if he came in and he played decent, then great. But I would rather have Russell Wilson, to be totally honest.
Yeah, that's how I feel. Justin Fields is my number one just because he's younger. I think he has more potential and he's the most mobile out of the 3 of those guys. But I do like Russ Wilson too. And I think that he would be a good addition and a good bridge guy. And I agree with you on Rodgers. My thing with him is that he's pretty old. And I know ultimately we're talking about a bridge guy. In my opinion, the best thing that could come of them signing Aaron Rodgers is that they don't trade up to 1 for quarterback. And as much as I really love Cam Ward and I want him to be a Giant, if you are going to spend the amount of money that they are going to have to spend on Aaron Rodgers, and I am hearing from Giants fans that, Aaron Rodgers is going to be cheap and he's humble and he just wants to stay in New Jersey. I'm like, I don't know what world you're living in. It's not the same world that I'm living in. Let me tell you that. Yeah. But, Aaron Rodgers is not going to be signed on a veteran minimum deal. So we're talking about a lot of money here for a guy who's 41 years old, not the most mobile, and has dealt with injuries recently. So I'm like, if you're going to do that and you're going to invest in Aaron Rodgers, then you can't also give up future draft picks for Cam Ward. To me, it's got to be one or the other. And that's why I like the idea of a Justin Fields or a Russ Wilson, because if you trade up for Cam Ward, then if you're giving away assets, whatever they're going to have to give up for him, at least you know that Russ Wilson is really going to be that bridge guy. He's going to be a guy who maybe plays through this year until you feel like Cam Ward is ready, or Justin Fields, whoever it is. I just feel like there's also going to be less pressure on Ward. I think if you bring in Rodgers, there's a pretty good chance, especially because we don't know what this offensive line is going to be, that he could get injured early on. And we can make that argument for any player, especially with the Giants' history when it comes to injuries. I get that. But you're talking about a 41-year-old. Like, it is not the same as Justin Fields. Okay. So, I just think with Fields or Wilson, there's just less pressure on having Cam Ward have to be ready to go and ready to play so quickly. If, God forbid, you spend all this money on Aaron Rodgers and then he gets injured in week 5.
I mean, I very much agree with all of that. And again, I think Russell Wilson's going to be a little bit of a better deal. I think he's going to come in and be competent. I don't think he's going to be fantastic. He's going to be competent. And for the Giants, what they had last year, the bar is so low. I mean, watching Daniel Jones get to a point, and I feel bad because I really think Daniel Jones was a great guy. I think he loved the team. I think he wanted to succeed.
Yeah.
Just watching him, the neck, I'm assuming it's the neck. No one really knows. The throw power wasn't the same when he came back after the Miami injury in 2023. And that's a situation where he just couldn't throw the ball. And he had wide open guys, and he was so shell-shocked he didn't throw to them. If you can get Russell Wilson to come in here and be a moderate level, just guy who will pass the ball and distribute it, then that gets you to wherever you need to go in terms of when the rookie is ready. And it's going to be competitive football. I know the Giants have a tough schedule, but if they're able to do the right things in the draft and free agency, they're not going to be a total dumpster fire. So trust me, I'm not glossing over the Giants' problems. I do think they get banked. They get a little bit more criticized than they should be. Not saying that they aren't. They're great. But last thing I'll say on this, I was watching the playoffs this year, and honestly, it just worked out this year. I didn't get to see a ton of Bills games. It just didn't work out. And this year I'm watching the playoffs, and I'm watching the Bills defense, and I'm thinking to myself, if this was the defense Joe Shane was fielding, these players, he'd be crucified. We wouldn't stop talking about how he didn't have star players here, there, and wherever. And trust me, I have plenty of issues with Joe Shane. I think the Giants are farther along than they get credit for. They're just missing the quarterback.
I feel that way a little bit on defense too. As much as I feel like the secondary desperately needs help, I do truly feel like if we brought in a good defensive tackle next to Dexter Lawrence and we brought in a good cornerback one, I feel like those two things immediately would change the defense. Because the beginning of the year, the defense was keeping us in games. We were leading the NFL in sacks for 5 or 6 weeks, however long it was. So there's some hope there. And, obviously the way the season went, everyone looked atrocious outside of Dexter Lawrence, but I feel like that could be an easier quick fix, if you will, than maybe we're expecting. I'm more worried about the offense because to me, there's just so many moving pieces. We need an offensive lineman. Maybe we need more than one offensive lineman. We also need a wide receiver. We need a quarterback, to get all of those things. And I think that's the one thing that makes me feel like maybe if we get Rodgers, it won't be the worst thing in the world, because I feel like if you bring in Rodgers, and I felt the same way about Stafford, you have to bring in Devontae Adams. And you've already got in free agency, you've got 2 positions of need. You've leveled up there at both positions. And then you have the flexibility in the draft to really go best player available. And if you bring in a cornerback, and you bring in a couple offensive linemen, ideally they get a veteran guard who really can help Ezeudu and Neal be serviceable. I don't need them to be the best offensive linemen in the league. I need them to not be turnstiles. That's it. Like you said, expectations for these players were low.
It's low. And I don't even know if Ezeudu is making the roster. And I'll definitely be getting into that as we go deeper into the offseason here. But yeah, I mean, the Giants need so much on offense. And I'm looking at it as they've made so many swings. Let's say from the second half of Gettleman's tenure through Shane, so many swings and misses. There's been a couple of hits, but a lot of these things we're talking about, there was a time when Tony and Galladay were supposed to be this big explosive weapon package for us, and they did nothing, a combined nothing. They missed so hard, it seems impossible that you can miss that bad. So, and I think about that trade all the time when they traded back for Tony, and I was fine with it. I'm oh, well, they passed on Slater and they passed on Parsons, but they're going to have great picks next year. And then all they get out of that is Kayvon, who I'm not out on yet, but I think he's not a top 5 pick, so at this point. So I think they've just missed so much. Sorry. I think they've missed so much. They've missed, on offense. And I would rather look at this offseason as, can I just fix one thing? Can I fix quarterback? And maybe this isn't what they should do. I just think about this a lot. Like, is it possible for me to fix the defensive line, quarterback, and right guard, and everything else I can't fix, but I know I can fix those things? Like, instead of spreading myself too thin, can I like get myself to a position where I only have one or two big openings next year, which is something they've been trying to do for years, and they can never quite get there where it's like, hey, this offseason we just have to check box 1 and box 2, and then it's over, you know? So I don't know. If they walk away and they like double, triple down on defensive linemen between free agency and the draft, and they're all good players, I'm not going to be upset. But I hear what you're saying. They have so many needs on offense that they need to address that too.
Well, and that's the thing that's tough. And that's one of the reasons why I get frustrated when I hear other fans just being like, well, who cares what they pay Matt Stafford? Pay him, $100 million or whatever. Or pay Aaron Rodgers. Like, who cares? It's not your money. And I'm like, I understand that. I don't care how much money they give him. My problem is that I have PTSD from Dave Gettleman, because this is what's going to happen is you either have to get it right in free agency or the draft. Yeah. And when you have multiple GMs now who have missed on both of those things, that's why the roster is what it is. And we're not the Patriots. We don't have $100+ million. We will next year if Joe Shane's lucky enough to make it to next offseason. But it's like when you're talking about just hitting on a couple players in free agency, that's why I love free agency, because you have the benefit of actually guys who've succeeded in the NFL. And I don't care about overpaying them, but the concern that I have is that if then you overpay these players in free agency, and then you're trying to make up for it in the draft, but you miss on the draft picks because ultimately it is a bit of a crapshoot at some point. Like, I think we all agreed, like Neil and Kayvon were going to go in the top 10, maybe the top 15. They weren't reached on. Those were the guys that were projected to go there. Yeah. And it just didn't work out for who knows what the real reason is there. But then I'm like, then we're going to be in a position again, right? Where like, if we overpay in free agency and then we miss on players in the draft, well, now we don't have any money to spend and we still have a bad roster. So like, how do you trust the front office to turn it around again at that point? And then maybe it's just as simple as, well, you fire them and start over. But then, we've gone how many years of just bad football, bad roster, bad management. It's like a never ending cycle.
You and I were talking before we came on, and, everyone wants to say they're excited about this year's candidates. Everyone's excited, just like they're going to be excited about the first round of the draft. And some of these guys are going to work out and some of them aren't. But going into it, they're the savior, right? And that's a big part of why I started the newsletter, is because for us to come on here at this stage in the offseason, like me and you can't come on here and go, Nick Nash out of San Diego State is the wide receiver 2 we need. We're going to get him in the 5th round. He's going to solve problems. That may very well happen, or whatever team he goes to. But, you can't predict that. You need more Micah McFadden's to work out, to build a good roster. You need more Darius Slayton's, especially when you miss so much on the better percentage type blue chip prospects. So, you need those types of things. Like, we've bashed Darius Slayton for years. Like, there's, because he does have the drop problem. But the reality is he was a 5th round pick, I think. He was 5th round pick. And he played like a legit wide receiver 2 for years. I mean, that's an insane value. And like, how many players in the 2nd and 3rd rounds have the Giants taken in recent years that just really didn't live up to what they needed to do? I talk all the time, about how when Giants traded for Eli and mortgaged their future, the bill never came due because they were supposed to give up a 1st round pick and really kind of gut the next year's draft. That same day after they traded for Eli, they drafted Chris Snee in the 2nd round, like a ring of honor, one of the best offensive linemen of all time. Then the next year, with no 1st round pick and only 4 selections, they walk away with Corey Webster, Justin Tuck, and Brandon Jacobs. So and those were like mid-round guys. So you need to really build the roster. Like, we've had too many. Like, Cordell Flott was taken in the 3rd round. He's not supposed to be terrible 3 years in, and he's gotten a little bit better, but he should be a legit cornerback too now. And that's just happened way too often.
Yep. And it's tough because in my opinion, I feel like it's all of it. And when you look at players who have left the Giants and they go to other teams and they immediately succeed, at some point you have to look back at the organization and be like, what's the problem here? Because it's not the player, right? It's got to be the coaching, it's the training, it's the scheme, it's something that's not connecting. And then it's like, well, if the front office is not getting it right on the draft picks, or they're getting it right on the draft picks, but it's the coaching that's the problem, you can't blow up the coaching every single year. So, I mean, I don't know what the answer is, because now we're going into year four of Brian Dable and Mike Kafka, who have had some of the worst offensive stats in the league. Right. And then we're going on year 2 of Shane Bowen. Like, I get that you don't want to turn it all over all the time. But I'm like, at some point, you have to look in the mirror and be like, we have some serious changes that we need to make. And when our defense starts off really well and just shits the bed and Tay Banks is horrible and we traded up to get him, like, you got to look at the coaching at some point and be like, we really have to make some changes here, because it's not always the player and they go and thrive elsewhere.
I do think it's more Dable than Shane. I think Shane's done some questionable things. I think the Saquon Barkley thing really blew up in the worst way possible. Yeah. What I'm angry about as a Giants fan is just that they had 6 years to build him like a great roster 2 times over and didn't. Not so much that they let him walk this time. And I get that, like, it's a good story to bash Shane on that. And like I've said, there's plenty I'll bash Shane on. That to me, like, all right, maybe he underestimated it, but also Saquon wasn't a priority. And that is what it is. But I think Shane's definitely made some mistakes. But I look at the coaching, and there's just no way all of these players that other people were like high on are just not doing it. Like, I don't like Deonte Banks. His season last year was atrocious, and if he wasn't ready to be a number one, like, I totally get that. Maybe he's not a number one corner, but then a coach gets in front of that, and a coach, some of those attitude problems were there. A coach gets in front of that. So, Malik Neighbors not knowing where to line up in the right spot. Like, Malik is a guy who cares and he wants to be here. Coach him. I don't, and like the last thing I'll say on it, like, Dable's made a lot of questionable in-game decisions that really scare me. Like the Adoree Jackson thing in 2022 with the punt return, that to me, like, all right, all's well that ends well, right? Like, it ended up working out. I feel like they could have won another game or two if they didn't do that, but whatever. You go into last season, you find out that in 2023 against the Jets that he didn't like have a backup plan at kicker, even though he knew his kicker was injured. Gano misses the field goal. I think it was something like the stat was like 1% chance the Jets could win that game at that point, and they won. And I was just, like, fine. It's fine that they won, whatever. But then the second year, last year, week 2, he has like a full day's notice. He has a kicker on the practice squad. Can't be worse than the punter. Like, can't. Then why is he on the practice squad? Doesn't call him up. Like, but he's make sure every week they're doing roster gymnastics for a fullback he'll use for a few snaps, or, a 3 linebackers for a kick coverage. And I just can't find I'm trying to find the method to the madness, and I just can't find it.
Yeah. Well, and that was one of the reasons why I'm disappointed that Dable is back. And I felt like if you were going to get rid of one of them, you have to get rid of both. And I kind of look at it as like, if they bring in Aaron Rodgers, whatever they do this season, I'm like, they're doing whatever they have to do to save their jobs. Let's be honest. But, I don't think that bringing in Rodgers and Devontae Adams is going to make us a playoff bound team. And that's all of a sudden going to fix everything. I'm almost like, good, bring in Aaron Rodgers. We're going to fail with Aaron Rodgers like the Jets did. And then everyone's going to get fired. And then we can start this whole thing all over again.
Yeah.
But I have the same issues with Dable, is that I feel like he really doesn't learn from his mistakes. And it's the same thing with Shane. You went multiple years. You went into the year knowing Andrew Thomas is injury prone and your swing tackle was Joshua Zudo. It's unacceptable.
Who's not a tackle.
Unacceptable that you did it once, fireable offense that you did it twice. Yeah. So those are the things, and like everything that you mentioned with Dable, for me, like the penalties, the fact that the team is so undisciplined that Malik Neighbors has five illegal shifts penalties is disgusting. Yeah. And it's not, I agree with you. Like, I think Malik I also think he's really matured throughout the entire season. Like the way that he spoke during Super Bowl week, I loved a lot of the things that he had to say. But, he does want to be great and he wants to learn. And I love that about him. But I agree. Like, it's up to Dable that you have to coach him. And I don't know if you listen to Bob Papa and Carl Banks, but when you have someone like Carl Banks, who is in the building on a regular basis, I don't think he's in the meetings, but he goes to training camps. He's involved in a lot. When he says publicly on his Twitter and on his podcast that you have to coach your best players, that Dable's not doing it. And we see it on the field, but to have it confirmed from someone who's in the building is very scary. And I'm like, I don't understand, like you said, like the method to the madness. Like, what are we doing? It's year 4 now. So we're going to go into year 4 where we have a team who makes the same mistakes over and over again, who is undisciplined, who is a lot of things are wrong with them, clearly, that I'm just like, how am I supposed to have hope that Dable's going to get it together? Like, I get his point about, oh, we'll see what good quarterback play can do. Yes, I get that. But you agreed with Joe Shane at some point that this was going to be the quarterback room. So
yeah. How did you not, this year they're going all out. Last year they didn't do that. And they were also, I mean, it came out that they were very worried about offending Daniel Jones. And I just think that was, look, they could have had Russell Wilson. And do I think the season's much better? Maybe. I mean, I think Russell Wilson, I mean, he would have missed the first few weeks, but I think he would have put much better football out there on the field. Ultimately, like, I agree with everything you said, but I'm looking at Dable, and I think this year, like, there is a decent chance. Like, if you're looking for good news on the Giants, if they walk away with a quarterback that can, again, be average, or Cam Ward comes in and he's decent, he's not the next, Peyton Manning, but he's decent and, whatever, and they win enough games, they win like 6-7 games. I think, Dable's going to be able to say, look, I had a competent quarterback, and I should stay. And I think Mara's going to buy that. I think if they went Shador, which now is seeming like unlikely, and Shador looked lost, like that would get them fired. But now it looks like it really seems like they're going to end up in the middle again. And like maybe they'll just bottom out and get fired. But, I think about 2022 a lot. And Dable was able to get them through success with like a much less talented roster than they have now. Some people say they're less talented now. I don't agree with that. But, a less talented roster. I mean, no wide receiver. I mean, and that's, again, like you talked about Kadarius Toney. Like, he couldn't make it in that wide receiver room where, like, I would have a shot in that wide receiver room.
Right. Richie James was, like, one of the best ones, which is insane.
Insane. And, like, I get it. He was scheming it so well for, like, to maximize Daniel Jones, but he still made it, like, an entire season. And he made it work. And, like, where is that now with good players? Like, why can't then you get the best out of Deontay Banks? Why can't you get – and I don't want to say you didn't get the best out of Malik Neighbors, but Malik Neighbors knowing where to line up would probably be the best thing to get out of Malik Neighbors. So, it's a big question mark. I really don't know. I part of me kind of wishes Wink Martindale won the fight, but I think he would have been a disaster too. So we'll see.
Yeah, I know. I was really disappointed with that whole thing that happened with Wink because I really liked him, and it's hard to really know the truth, right? We hear both sides of it. And I think that ultimately when you see the turnover on the Giants staff and you see like the way that Dable was in some of the meetings on Hard Knocks, the way that he talks to the media and things like that, like I could 100% see Wink's point of view. Like he just seems like one of those people who it's like, it's my way or the highway. Like I run this team and you listen to me, like that type of thing. And maybe that's why they kept Shane Bowen is he's a yes man. I don't know. They demoted Mike Kafka. Like there's a lot of things that I just am like on top of the losing season. Like when you just look at the way things are run makes me a little concerned. And I think the thing that I'm most concerned about is whether it's Aaron Rodgers or Russ Wilson, Justin, whoever it is, whatever veteran quarterback they bring in, if they bring this guy in and the team looks good compared to last year. So they win 7 or 8 games. They're still not going to be anywhere close to the playoffs, but they're going to be probably out of a top 10 pick to get a good quarterback in 2026. Then I'm like, it's 2022 all over again. I would rather just have a horrible season this year, which is honestly what I'm expecting with the schedule and everything. And then next year we get a better quarterback. Maybe we have a new GM and a head coach and we really start fresh then. But I just feel like this season is not going to go that well. And I don't really think that there's any way around that.
I mean, it's a rock and a hard place because you're right. It's a much harder schedule than last year. And, again, like last year, if they had a competent quarterback, they're winning several more games. They would have got blown out in the playoffs. This is not me glossing over what their issues were, but there were several games that were there to be won because the defense really, one thing I'll say about Bowen, the defense kind of, stood up, when it needed to. So I could see this year being an absolute disaster, and then our problems are in theory solved. I could also see, but we say that, and how many of the great quarterbacks right now, by the way, like the top quarterbacks in the league, are like guys who were middle or late first round or later in the draft, like that people had big questions on. So that's where I always get like, like this year, it's like, oh, well, Cam Ward, we're getting ourselves excited about him because he's the best option, but no one's like kind of blowing smoke about it. Trevor Lawrence, like who knows? Maybe Trevor Lawrence in the right situation is different, but remember he was supposed to be like the next Peyton Manning. How many, like I could sit here and ramble off a bunch of those guys. So look, if this year's terrible and we have our pick of quarterbacks next year, I'm going to be happy about it. If we can come out of this offseason, which I think is risky because we had to beat the Colts for one meaningless game, and like if we were able to just kind of pick the quarterback we wanted at 1 overall, or if we got Stafford and we're able to take like Carter or Hunter, if you come out of this offseason and feel like, hey, other than quarterback, we have a young roster that's really promising. We hit 2 drafts out of the park in a row. 2 free agencies went well. That's where I'm like, I'm okay mortgaging picks. Like next year, if we do win 7 games, hey, we got to mortgage like two or three first rounders to do this. Because if you have like a good team, cool. The problem is the Giants, the Giants last year, if they made that Godfather offer for Drake May, you're like, well, okay, well, what's there? What's left? So I really just want the team to get better. And then I'm going to figure out the season when we get here because I could see it going either way. Yeah.
Well, and I'm on board with them getting a free agent quarterback like Fields or Russ Wilson or even Jameis Winston. Like at this point, I don't really care who the quarterback is because I feel like ultimately it's more important that they get it right this year in the other positions. So we're building up the roster and we're building depth. And then next year, when you have $100+ million and a better quarterback class, then maybe you really focus on mortgaging the picks to get your franchise guy. Like I don't think that Will Howard is the Giants franchise quarterback. And if they can't get Cam Ward and let's say they decide against Shedeur Sanders, like I don't really think it's Jalen Milroe or someone like that either. Maybe I'm wrong and maybe it could be, but to me, it just feels like this team has so many holes and they don't even have a chance of having a lot of success this year that why don't we focus on making the whole team good? And then ideally, I mean, this is like the best case scenario, right? Is next year you just plug and play quarterback.
I couldn't agree with you more. I couldn't agree. And that's like really what part of what really spurred me to do the newsletter now is that I want this team to just get better. And what I mentioned, I think at the top of the podcast, I wanted them to get Stafford and whatever Stafford did for them, fine. I just knew it was going to let Shane go, hey, we're going to take either Hunter, Carter, or Mason Graham, at 3. And that made me feel a lot better about what the Giants were going to do. It made me feel better about what they're going to do in the second round, in the third round. So, I really – as a Giants fan, I just want the team to be better. I want a signal caller back there that will throw the ball beyond 5 yards down the field, and they'll be watchable. I don't need them to make the playoffs next year. I just want them to be watchable, and they don't need Aaron Rodgers for that. And maybe Jameis Winston's going to be frustrating. I think right now he seems like a better option because of what we had. But if they could get Russell Wilson, and if they were the type of front office that was going to say hey, we took Russell Wilson. We're not actually in love with Cam Ward, or we weren't able to trade up and Cam Ward went to the Titans or the Browns. And hey, we're going to take Abdul Carter because, now we're going to have an insane pass rush. I would be happy with that. And I think where a lot of Giants fans are concerned is that they have a desperate GM now. And no one's really excited about that because they saw what he was like before he was desperate. And now who wants to see him desperate? Seriously.
Right. I do like the idea of that though, because then it takes some of the pressure off them that at 3, they really can focus on best player available. And then in round 2, 3, or 4, they can bring in a quarterback and, maybe they're not in love with any of those guys who's going to be the future, but in the best case scenario, they work out to be a backup. And then, then they're on the roster for next year. You can get rid of Tommy DeVito. And then next year you can bring in another vet if you don't want to sign any of these guys to a 2-year deal. But I just like that it wouldn't force them into position where they're trading up picks for Shedeur Sanders because they desperately need a quarterback, even if he's not their guy. And that was my whole argument to fans who were like, why are you rooting for a loss against the Colts? This is such a great win. We don't want the GM to have the first pick anyway. I'm like, no, that's wrong because if we trade up from 3 to 1 and mortgage our future, that's 100% worse than them having the first overall pick and picking Cam Ward or Shedeur Sanders.
Yeah. And I think now we would have been happy, right? Because I think Shedeur, I really actually do feel like they're not really in on Shedeur anymore. And I could see them they would just take Cam Ward and Cam Ward might work out.
Yeah.
I feel like people are getting a little bit higher on him, but now we're also getting towards the draft. But, again, like if they bring in Cam Ward, sure, let's see it. Like I'm pumped. Like let's see how it goes. But, if they were able to do that and also keep like their second and third round picks and maybe like, hey, we get a legit starter next to, the second round, you can get legit starters. Giants fans don't remember because, they're so bad at drafting. You get legit starters. I mean, and typically when we do get legit starters, it's it's at defensive tackle who spend 3 or 4 years here on losing teams and leave. So like, I want them to keep their picks. So I think it's going to be really tough. I don't think either one of us is going to be super happy after the draft, but we might feel better than we do right now. That's like my honest gut feeling.
Yeah. I feel good that they have a lot of draft picks because it makes me feel like at least there's going to be, in theory, more talent and some more competition across the board. So I feel a little bit better about that, especially knowing that last year they only had 6 picks. Like I think a lot of us in rounds 4, 5, and 6 were like, get a quarterback, get Joe Milton, get Spencer Rattler, like just bring in a quarterback. And I understand why they didn't. But I mean, this year I'll be like legitimately shocked if they don't get a quarterback, especially if they don't get one at 3. But if you had to make a prediction, let's just say hypothetically speaking, let's say they sign Rodgers to a 1-year deal. What do they do at 3?
That's a great question. I think it's going to come down to who goes before them. I don't think Rodgers necessarily has them change their plan the way Stafford would have. I think if Rodgers comes in, maybe it keeps them from trading up. And then if Cam Ward falls to them, I think they're going to take the shot at the quarterback because they're desperate. And also having a rookie quarterback means as long as he's not a disaster, but you got to let us see this through,
Right.
But if this is probably the best scenario right now, if we get Rodgers and we don't trade up and Cam Ward goes to the Browns, then I think we're taking whoever's there of Carter and Hunter, and the Giants will be much better off if they do that, assuming those guys work out, So I don't think it changes it the way Stafford would have, but it definitely ups the percentage of the Giants ending up with the top defensive star in the top 3 picks.
Yeah. I think so too. And then I think they could be more likely to get a Dart or Milrow a little bit later and just say, Aaron Rodgers is going to be the guy for this year. I also think the thing with Rodgers is there's no way you're bringing him in and being like, listen, we're going to target Cam Ward or Shedeur Sanders. And like, you're just going to be the bridge guy halfway through the seaon because he is absolutely not going to go for being a backup at any point.
And I think he's coming from a much more vulnerable position. I mean, if Stafford came in and I've never, talked with Stafford, but, just thinking where he's coming from, like he's coming in to be the guy. So he's not going to be threatened in theory by like, hey, we drafted the guy that's going to replace you in a year and a half. Like that's not, I don't think was going to be a problem for him. So Rodgers though is a wounded animal right now. And Rodgers like needs to prove himself. Like if he's going to play, there's a reason. Like he has, I'm assuming it's not for the money. So if he's going to play, he wants to play and he wants to do well. I don't know if like contending teams are going to want him right now. I mean, I think the biggest threat to the Giants of getting him is the Raiders. So like, are you going to make the argument that he's going to go to the Raiders and make them a playoff team? Like, okay, maybe. But I think if he comes in, I agree with you. He's not going to be pumped about the idea of there being like a top 3 quarterback pick that if he has a bad couple weeks, this guy's playing in November. I don't see him being happy about that.
Yeah. If they get Rodgers and Adams, I would love best player available at 3. And I wouldn't even hate if they traded back from 3 to 6, let the Raiders get Sanders, and then they can get Mason Graham or Will Compton or whoever, is going to be the best player available there. I just like that it awards them some freedom. But with Rodgers, do you think there's any way he gets a 2-year deal? I don't personally think so, but with the Giants, I'm like, you never know.
You took the words out of my mouth. Like on any other team, no. Like any team outside of New York, no. But I think again, the Giants are a wounded animal. They need to do something, and this is the problem, right? This comes back to I actually don't have an issue, and I think I've said this on the show, and if I'm repeating myself, I'm sorry, but I don't have an issue with Mara deciding that maybe there wasn't a better option and like kept the coach and the GM, because honestly, I don't know that there was a better one. I think if the Giants got rid of them at that point on the calendar, they're running the risk of just like doing what the Texans did a couple years ago. They essentially bring in a guy to fire him at the end of the year, and that's not going to be what the Giants want to do. But the problem is the front office is now thinking they're thinking about saving their jobs. They're not coming in and going, hey, we have a 3-4 year slate. Let's just sit tight at 3 and take the best player possible. And I think Giants fans would feel a lot better. Like, I think Giants fans would be like, hey, man, Justin Fields or Russell Wilson and the best player available at 3. Okay. Like, cool. It can't be worse than Daniel Jones last year. So,
Right.
and I think that's the sad truth. So this is going to be a train wreck. It's a train wreck that might work out. That's the scary thing. It's a train wreck where everybody, like, the cars may fall off the track and just end up perfectly aligned again. But it's just the stupidest way to get there possible.
Yeah, I agree. Like we're just going the wrong way. And I still am just worried that this year is going to be like 2022 all over again and just set us back in more ways.
Yeah.
Especially if they win 7 games with like a 41-year-old Aaron Rodgers. It's just like, what? There's no longevity here. Like at some point we're like begging for a franchise quarterback who's going to give us hope for more than 1 year. And I agree with what you said too, like about the quarterback thing. Like, honestly, I'll take anyone at quarterback. Anyone is going to be better than the quarterbacks that we have watched play for this Giants team over the last 7 years. Yeah. So I'll take whoever it is. But that's the sad reality is that we are now considering a 41-year-old, in my opinion, mostly washed up quarterback because it's better than what we have witnessed the last years.
This is where the Giants are, and they've had so many swings and misses. Like at the worst case scenario now, they should just be a team that doesn't have a quarterback, but everything else is fine. And you're sitting here going, like either we trade away our first round pick for, maybe a quarterback on a team that wants to start over, or something else, but maybe we wait till next year and we're just okay this year because the team's good. But they've missed on so much. And then if this was a quarterback class where the quarterback was like, hey, this is going to be the next Jaden Daniels, like, okay, well, that's a good start. You don't even know if you take Cam Ward at 3 without having to trade up, it may just be a waste. So it's a rough year. It's going to be a rough year for Giants fans, and if you listen to if you're going to read and subscribe to the newsletter, at least you can have some fun with looking at it along the way. So that's why I started.
Yes. So let's end this on a positive note. What is one thing that the Giants could do for you personally between free agency and or the draft that would make you excited about this upcoming season?
It's a great question. I really want them to fix cornerback 1 and the defensive line. I think those are the most realistic things they can do. And if they can get a right guard in there as well, I know that's like 3 things, but why that's not really a cop-out answer is the Giants have failed for years at just fixing what needs to be fixed. They just find a way not to do it. And I don't want them to go out and get a big-time edge rusher or a big-time wide receiver right now, like unless they draft Abdul Carter. I want them to get a shutdown corner. Let Deonte Banks be a good cornerback too, because that's probably what he is. And I want to get Dexter Lawrence help. And if they can do that, if they can say, hey, this is the realistic stuff that's in front of us and we're going to attack it, I'll see that as growth and be really happy about that. And then, we'll see the chaos unfold on draft night. But yeah, if they can just take what's in front of them, I'll be happy.
Yeah. And the good news is we won't have to relive it all on Hard Knocks this year. So that's really the best news out of all of this.
I'll just say this. My best friend's an Eagles fan, and it was a long year. We went to the Giants-Eagles game together at MetLife, and I was ready to go, like in the middle of the third quarter, and we stayed because I'm a good person. But, it was tough. So, not having Hard Knocks. I remember being so excited for Hard Knocks, and now I'm so excited that there is no Hard Knocks. So it's going to be great.
Me too. I even after it aired was like, oh, this isn't that bad. Like, I know everyone was going on about the Saquon thing, but I was just like, look, it is what it is. He just doesn't value the quarterback position. And then after seeing how the entire rest of the season played out, it was like, maybe Hard Knocks wasn't such a great idea.
It wasn't, and it led to so much fodder for him. And I'll just say this, while we're here, I'll say this about Saquon. And with Joe Shane, his mistake was just not trading him last year. I didn't have a problem with him not bringing him back, but if you had traded him and he went to the Texans on a rental, number one, maybe you get that 2nd-round pick that was Lassiter that he really wanted, maybe, or you get a 3rd-round pick or something. And then if he went to the Eagles after that, it's still not your fault. But I'll just say this, as a Giants fan, that's older than college age, like Saquon, while I liked him and I think he's a great guy, he was on the team for terrible years. He played 2 games in one of them. It was only 1 good season. A lot of my friends in the media were like, oh my God, how can you watch Saquon Barkley go to the division rival and win the Super Bowl? I'm like, it's not like Strahan went to the Cowboys and won the Super Bowl. It's not, If you're an adult, he's not that important to your Giants fandom because he was a guy that had a 60-yard run every game that they still lost. So who cares? That's just how I looked at it. But I just wanted to say that. I feel like Giants fans take a lot of heat for having to watch Saquon this year. And honestly, it just sucked watching the Eagles. I didn't really care about Saquon.
Right. I felt the same way. The biggest mistake that I felt is that they didn't trade him before the deadline. And I think ultimately, though, that comes down to John Mara, because from what I understand and from what we saw on Hard Knocks was his very anti-trading during the season because it meant they were giving up. So
please, actually, I mean, Saquon did his best to help the Giants get Drake May. Because on the Monday Night Football game that Tommy DeVito won, he had that insane fumble that I didn't even think was a fumble. He did his best. He was really trying to help the team. And, and honestly, that might have, if that had worked out, it would have been his best thing he ever did for the Giants. So, that's frustrating. But, yeah, John Mara definitely, if the Giants are going to succeed, I think he does need to step out a little bit and let them do their jobs. So we'll see what happens here. But it might not be great, but it's going to be interesting. So let's have some fun.
That's the good news is this is the best. If you're a Giants fan, this is the best time of year. It's free agency and the draft because it's when we have the most amount of hope. It's when we're finally bringing in some new talent. So this is the time to be excited. We have hopefully a lot to look forward to with free agency around the corner. So make sure you guys subscribe to New in Blue. Again, the newsletter is in the show notes and the description. So you can tune in for all things Giants. Thanks for joining me, Dan. Excited to see what happens next week.
Thank you. Have a great weekend.